here, and I'm going to start Torah together tonight. I want to do something a little bit different. So normally, and this is with everyone's permission. So normally for Torah together, we read the week's Torah portion, um, and we go through it. We have the community siddur that we read, and we have our Chumash that we read. I would like to talk more about Hanukkah, if that's okay. Um, we can discuss this week's Torah portion if you'd like. We can read through it. I feel like since Hanukkah, we're about to round out Hanukkah, it might be nice to talk a little bit more about Hanukkah, if that's okay. I'd like to take maybe a little bit of a different perspective on Hanukkah than we've had in some of our other classes that we've had this week. And I'd like to discuss it in the context of Hanukkah today. So if anyone's okay with that, that's what I would like to discuss. Otherwise, we can talk about this week's Torah portion. But I would really like to talk about Hanukkah. And it looks like we have a few people who are okay with Hanukkah. And maybe even if you haven't lit your Hanukkah, maybe we could light the Hanukkah and everyone can participate that way as well. So we'll do that as well. That'll be fun. We actually missed, we were going to go to Chabad's outdoor lighting, and we missed it, unfortunately. So we're lighting here at home anyway. Or I should say my friend's house, since I don't live here, but that's okay. Anyway, so let's talk about Hanukkah. So I want to ask an interesting question about Hanukkah. So this is something I was at a latke cooking contest, which I won, by the way, and I'm very proud of that. And if you go on newkosher.org, you can see the recipe that helped me to win for best overall latke. It was the latkes with fire roasted pepper apple chutney, which is, I know, like the bougiest sounding thing ever, but it tasted amazing. So yes, that is for the garlic latkes with the dip. Uh-oh, we got a phone call. Hang on a sec, sorry. Is it okay? I'll call you back. Okay, great. Sorry about that. So anyway, I won that. Very exciting. So but here's what I really want to talk about. I know I'm stammering a little bit. When we were at the cooking contest, there's this guy in our community who's a very learned fellow. And he said, I want to talk about the meaning of Hanukkah, which is funny. Whenever someone says the meaning of Hanukkah, I think of the Rugrats episode, The Meaning of Hanukkah, and it makes me laugh. But anyway, he was like, I want to talk about the meaning of Hanukkah. And he was talking about the light and the light that is within inside us and all of these sort of really beautiful, deep things, right? So, but before that, he said, does anyone know the meaning? He's like, does anyone know the meaning of Hanukkah? And so there was this little girl there who's like maybe 7 years old, and she said, oh, it's about the oil and, all of that. And he was like, well, that's one thing. What else is Hanukkah about? And so jokingly, half jokingly in the corner, because I guess I'm, something of a, I don't know, something of a jerk maybe sometimes. I I was like, oh, I know all about Hanukkah. Hanukkah was when a bunch of assimilated Jews and a bunch of fundamentalists decide to have a civil war with each other over the correct way to practice Judaism. And he just looked at me like, oh, you jerk. Like, how could you say that, right? But, there's truth to that. There is historic truth. And, Rabbi Samlin, at his class that he taught about the Talmud and Hanukkah, discussed this. And so I want to relate this to one other story. I was doing an interview for the God Project, and I was interviewing this one guy who's up in Boston who does the Boston Jewish music festival. And I asked him about, do you believe in God and all these other things? And he said, well, I have a great story about God. And he said, I have two kids, they're both teenagers, a boy and a girl. He said the girl is an atheist. She is a strict atheist. I mean, she is a cultural Jew. There is no metaphysical anything out there in the world, etc., etc. Now, very committed to Judaism, to Jewish community, but not connected to the metaphysical or the spiritual at all. His son, her brother, deeply religious. I guess a conservative type family, to use a label. So he's super, super religious, really into going to shul and the whole deal. She's a cultural Jew, whatever the case is. So the son did not want to celebrate Hanukkah. And the reason he didn't want to celebrate Hanukkah was that he felt, in his opinion, that it was inappropriate to celebrate a holiday that commemorates Jewish civil war. Because in his mind, he thought, what would Hanukkah be like today if we had a Maccabean type of revolt? And I'm not saying this is right, but this is the analogy he gave. It would be as if, an Orthodox synagogue came and started like shooting up the Reform synagogue. Like that was kind of his metaphor that he used, whether we believe that or not, because obviously that's a huge oversimplification of the situation. But, here's the very religious one who's like, we can't celebrate Hanukkah because, it represents this time when Jews were fighting each other, and we shouldn't honor fighting. We should honor coming together and being more sort of, diverse and ecumenical and all of these sort of values. This was kind of his perspective. Now, on the opposite end of the coin, the atheist sister, said, how can you not celebrate Hanukkah? Like, this is our holiday. Like, how can you turn your back on your culture by not celebrating Hanukkah? We have to light a menorah, and we have to, have latkes, and we have to do the whole deal. If we don't do that, then we're not Jewish. Judaism, for a lot of people, and the Torah backs this up, Judaism is not about beliefs necessarily. It's about mitzvot. It's about commandments. We commit ourselves to a certain lifestyle of loving kindness and humility and all of these different cultural traditions that we have. So giving up Hanukkah would be like giving up Judaism. So it's an interesting diversity within this one family. So I would be curious to know from all of you, what does that feel like? What does it feel like when you think about what Hanukkah is, that, you had the Hellenistic Jews who didn't as much have problems with statues of pagan gods in the temple, who didn't have a problem so much with the Hellenistic community deciding who the high priest was going to be. And then on the flip side, you have the Maccabeans, who were, the fundamentalists. They were, very much interested in maintaining a certain level of Jewish community and Jewish practice. Do you have any sense of that kind of talk, today, those kinds of dialogues, those kinds of questions? Is that meaningful at all to anyone? Because to me, I think it really gets to sort of the heart of a lot of issues that we kind of have in the Jewish world. Some of these tensions between what is, the right way to practice, what is the wrong way to practice. And then for those of us who are practicing Jews, who consider ourselves spiritual, what is the right way? And how do we go about deciding what the right way to be Jewish is? And then who is going to be that authority to whom we look to help us to make those decisions? So does anyone have any insight? Does anyone want to sort of share what their thoughts might be about that? And remember that there is no sort of right or wrong. These are, your opinions, your ideas, how you have drawn from Jewish identity, whether it's something you've had for a very long time or it's something that you're more recently developing, which, by the way, is not a converts and non-converts question. It's a, everyone kind of thing. You know, where do you kind of place importance in this dialogue? You know, the spiritual Jew in the family says no Hanukkah because it goes against his sense of Jewish spiritual religious values. On the other hand, the secular Jew who says we need to uphold tradition, it's kind of an interesting balance to me. And who do we look to for some of those answers? So let's see. So Cowboy Torah, I'm going to use your screen names. Cowboy Torah, I think it's relevant considering how many people are trying to find the meaningful aspects of expressions are. Many want to be historically and politically correct. Others are trying to find the deepest spiritual significance in the customs and holidays. Great point. And Diane is back. Hey, Diane. Sorry that your computer froze. So this is, this is really important, what you're saying here. We're all trying to find meaning, and so it's a dialogue worth having. I think that that's a fantastic point, and I'm glad that we can have it. Because a lot of people can't. This is something that's very interesting, not just in Judaism, but in a lot of religions, where just the discussion is something that can't be had. There are answers that are just sort of taken for granted so that we don't have to have, so that we don't have to have answers, don't have to have questions. Jonesy says, personally, I follow the example of Abraham. I am led a certain way. I fail at things. I succeed at things. But at the end of the day, my job is to uphold as I can without using my yardstick to measure others. Are they happy? Are they connected in a way that fulfills them? That's the questions I ask. Fantastic. I love that. So really, the perspective, Jonesy, that you're giving is this idea of it's not about you. Looking to other people, seeing how they connect. What is the experience there? What does that mean? I think that that's a great way. There is sort of this idea of the servant, or excuse me, the servant leader. It's the person who, instead of standing in front and who says, come this way, your job is actually to be the person who is behind, who is pushing. And what that means is it doesn't mean push like in an aggressive way. It means more that you have your hands on someone's back, and as they walk, you sort of walk with them. And then when they're about to come up on something, they're about to come up on some sort of difficult task, that's when you help to steer them a little bit. So it's a little bit of a different thing. This idea of sort of being behind and watching and helping to guide as needed, as opposed to being the person who forces everyone in the direction that you want to go in. So Jenny says, I've been reading and thinking about this a lot. I look at these stories, historically correct or not, as metaphors for our lives today. Not that the history doesn't matter, but I see the war between the Maccabees and Hellenistic Jews as the war we see in our culture. Jenny, this is fantastic. If you are comfortable, I'd love for you to share more about that. And Diane says, I like having ritual. I was raised a Catholic. They're big on ritual, so I like the ability to observe and celebrate holidays. And that's a very meaningful thing, too. I'll out myself a little bit here. I'm actually a Jew by choice as well. And I like to use the term Jew by choice as opposed to convert. The reason why I use Jew by choice, it's not a word that I like, because I like the idea that all Jews are Jews by choice. No one's forcing us to be Jewish. I like the term Jew by choice because I like being a part of communities that are voluntary and communities that are based around enjoying and loving who you are and what you are striving to become. And this attitude of you're either a Jew by choice or you're a Jew by birth, I think the problem with that is the opposite of choice is force. And the idea of being forced to be something, it sounds so rough. It sounds so hard to think of yourself in that way of like, I'm a Jew without a choice. Like, that's what it sounds like. So I like the term Jew by choice, and I wish Jews who were born into Judaism would use the term Jew by choice, because we're all Jews by choice. Okay, so Jenny says, between spirituality and secular life, and this is reflected in my personal life. Okay, so this is a great point. This idea of the secular and the spiritual, and how do we work those things together. Let's relate that to Hanukkah. So, where does the problem arise for Hellenistic and traditional Hasmonean Maccabean type of Jews in the Hanukkah story? Really, the issue doesn't come from any kind of rift within the spiritual community. It really comes as a result of this, for lack of a better word, secular influence. Actually, I guess a better word would be a political influence, which is something that comes from outside of the Jewish community itself. So I think that this is a very important part of the Hanukkah story. This is why I personally can't completely side with the son in the story that I told earlier about the son and the daughter and whether or not to celebrate Hanukkah, because it wasn't just a rift culturally within the Jewish community. It was something that happened as a result of an exterior pressure forcing itself upon the Jewish community. And that's where, for me, I see a little bit more complication there. Was that, the story, let's say, of Purim, where you have, and Purim relates really well to the Hanukkah story. The story of Purim, the idea of the Jews being murdered by this royal force, that's kind of the story that we're telling a little bit in the Hanukkah story. Of course, we have this other sort of cultural issue with Hellenistic Jews and all of that. But really, I think that's the story we tell ourselves now, and that's how we kind of relate to it, that it's really about surviving an external type of force. And Jonesy is talking about the idea of ritual. It brings you closer, but the mixture is exclusive, so it confuses many who are born Jewish. Do you find that? By exclusive, I mean I can handle Reform-type prayer, but personally, wine tefillin at the Torah, By exclusive, I mean I can handle Reform-type prayer, but personally wine tefillin in the Torah Moshe fashion and use an Art Scroll Sephardi Siddur. Okay. That is Jonesy, I'm really glad that you brought that up. And so I want to talk a little bit about that as well when I do my big wrap-up. So one of the things that's really interesting to me about the Hanukkah story, as I mentioned earlier, was this idea of the external force. So you have the external force of Hellenism, which forced on the Jewish community the defilement of the temple and all of these kind of other things. Now, a certain number of the Jews liked that. They were fine with it, and they wanted to go along with it. They didn't mind statues in the temple and all that sort of thing. Then you had the traditional, more renegade Jews who were, of course, completely against it, and that faction ended up winning and cleaning out the temple and all of this. So what I think is interesting is that one narrative in the spiritual community that we tell is this idea of assimilation. So that's a big theme in Hanukkah, right? This idea of, assimilate this, that kind of thing. It's a different kind of assimilation than what we have here. We don't have the president or anyone for that matter whose job it is to tell us how to practice Judaism. So our assimilation narrative in the United States is very different than the assimilation narrative that's told in Maccabees, that's told in the Hanukkah story. So I think that this is really interesting, and this is where I think we can kind of begin to be a little bit more honest in terms of how we, as sort of modern Jews living in the Western world, relate to the Hanukkah story. I don't think we can really tell it in this assimilation way and relate it to today. At least personally for me, I have a lot of trouble with that. I feel like it's something that is a lot harder to do because we don't have the external pressure. Now, I'm wondering, on the flip side of the coin, there's a lot of people who believe that societies act as a similar external pressure, something that is just as strong as something that is legislative, like the king and the Hellenistic changes within Judaism. Um, do you feel like Western culture really has that ability to drive Judaism out of you or to change your, Jewish perspective? And I relate that to um, uh, Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the founder of Reform Judaism in the United States. And he talked about why he had given up kashrut. He said the reason why he'd given up kashrut is that he felt like the basis of Judaism for him was ethical monotheism. And he said, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he said something to the effect of, I will not abstain from eating that which the rest of civilized society eats. So, that's why he gave up on kashrut. They gave up on wearing prayer shawls in the synagogue, and they gave up on kippot. Now, eventually, the Reform movement became a lot more um, traditional in approach. You'd actually be shocked what Reform Judaism looked like in the 1900s. I mean, even up until the 1950s, it really looked radically different than what we have now. So I'm wondering, where we draw the line in terms of saying what assimilation is. Jenny says, that she thinks that absolutely Western culture has the ability to sort of move us and manipulate us the way that a legislator could. How many Jews do you know who have Christmas trees in their homes every year? Okay, great point. And so Jonesy says, yes, I think it can drive out too. Okay, great, fantastic. So we're starting to say that yes, Western culture does have that ability to drive out of us this sort of Jewishness. I want to relate this to another kind of interesting story. There is a part of Israel called Bnei Brak, and Bnei Brak is where the Haredim live. Now, the Haredi Jews, if you're not familiar with that term, the Haredi Jews are otherwise called the ultra-Orthodox. They live in a community that is entirely of their own. They are very insular. They are not really interested in Israeli society outside of their community. They hold that modern Orthodox people or even right-wing Orthodox people are not practicing Torah Judaism. They hate Chabad. They see Chabad as being just this terribly liberal kind of thing. So there was a story about how a 7-year-old girl got spit on by a Haredi man who called her a dirty name in reference to sexuality. I'm not going to repeat it in this environment. You can obviously Google it and find it out. But it's a 7-year-old girl, and the reason why was that she was not dressed in a way that Haredi society feels is appropriate. Now, to give you a brief overview of how Zniut, which is the laws of modesty, works, you don't show elbows. You generally are covered all the way up to the wrists. Women wear skirts all the way down to their ankles. You can't wear sort of tight clothes at all. Things need to be a little bit baggy. Formalists is kind of the idea. And if you look at books on halacha zniut, and you can generally get those from like Art Scroll and Mizora, other, or I guess Mizora is Art Scroll, but other types of publishing societies. You can find these books. Halachos Znius is the way that it's said in Ashkenazi, accentuated Hebrew. There's all these rules about what is acceptable. You can't show collarbones, so that has to be covered up. You have to have, this kind of a deal. Well, I don't know exactly what the little girl was wearing, but it was something like she had a little bit more of a scoop, in her neckline, or she was maybe wearing a short sleeve T-shirt, something that maybe in Western world we wouldn't think anything of. but she was spit on, and she was called this dirty name. And so now this big thing on NPR about and other like blogs and things like that talking about this Haredi whatever. But there's an interesting idea in sociology, the idea of, you know, sociology is really about empathy. And so I want to sort of have a little bit of empathy. This sort of comes from the ideas of a gentleman by the name of Sam Richards. So Sam Richards is a sociologist, he's a professor, talks about the idea of radical empathy. So let's have a little bit of empathy here on this. So you are a Haredi Jew. You live in Israel, and you are awaiting Moshiach. The Messiah is going to come at any time. And we don't know who Mashiach is going to be. Mashiach will be whoever Moshiach is. But Moshiach is going to be this perfect leader of this country that you physically live in. Moshiach will literally take over Netanyahu's job and become the king of Israel. The temple is going to be restored, and we will go back to a more beautiful time. And you are living according to these very strict laws as far as what you wear, what you eat. You can't be on the same sidewalk as a woman. Women have to sit in the back of the bus because it's all of these rules around modesty. You know, you're not using birth control because you believe in really populating the planet. All of these other like really intense issues. You don't have a secular education because you believe the secular world is inherently evil and it's outsider. You're not going to go to college because you don't want your mind to be filled up with all these terrible secular ideas. So then you're there and you see this kid who's just blatantly violating your laws. These are Hashem's laws. This is big stuff. And you live in a country that's the size of New Jersey, that's filled up with nothing but these Jews that are just off the derech. They're just off the Torah. They don't know what true, authentic, godly Judaism is. And you just have your tiny little community. You're holding on sort of by your fingernails, waiting for Moshiach to come and to really make the world a better place. And here comes this kid strolling through your neighborhood looking just terrible. How would you feel? What would go through your mind when you saw that? What would that experience be to you? And then imagine that you react, and maybe you react inappropriately. And then your entire country, your countrymen and women who practice the same religion that you do, but they just don't do it quite right, are attacking you. That would be such an awful situation if you're coming from that perspective. So I think it's interesting to think about that in the context of the Hanukkah story. Because think about what's going on in, Yehuda Maccabee's mind. Like when he sees this world around him, and he sees the defilement of the temple, and he sees all these Jews who are in the gymnasiums and are practicing all of these other pagan things. It's an interesting question. Jonesy says, I get their logic, but it flies in the face of Tikkun Olam, peace on earth, without knowing the earth's inhabitants. Not very Abrahamic. And so it's an interesting question. Jenny then says, Abraham's world was very small. That's very true. That's why it's interesting when you look at the Torah and the use of the word olam, and then the use of the word eretz. So, like, where would you hear the word eretz? We'll do a pop quiz. Who knows where name one bracha, one blessing that has the word eretz in it? This will be a test. You win a prize. Fruit. Bingo. You got one. Jonesy wins because he knew that there was a bracha that had eretz in it. Now, there's tons of brachas that have olam in them because we say Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech HaOlam, the world. Diane's like, that's not fair. I'm just learning them. Well, hey, Diane, pick up the pace. pick up the pace. Let's learn. See, there you go. If even that's a motivation, just to one-up people. I like that, you know. Let's learn brachas just so we can one-up people. I like that. Um, I feel all of you. Hey, listen, I'm learning new stuff every day. I'm learning new stuff, right? I've been running PunkTorah since 2009. You think I know everything? I'll tell you another story about that later. Anyway, I think it's interesting to think about this Haredi news story in the context of the Hanukkah story, because you really have this same issue of like, what what's fair, you know? Was it fair for that guy to spit on that kid? Was it fair for that kid to go running through the neighborhood defiling Hashem's law, which is all this community lives for? Community doesn't live for Israeli law. They don't live for their own personal satisfaction. They live for what they believe God is commanding them to do. So, it's an interesting kind of question. I want you to ponder that tonight in the context of the Hanukkah story. So, I really have like one more thing about Hanukkah I'd like to talk about, and then I would like to spend about 5 minutes, maybe almost 10 minutes if I wrap this up faster. Any questions, any comments? Doesn't have to be about the class that we had tonight. And then we're going to light the menorah. So stick around. Don't run away. But we'll do some question and answer kind of stuff. The last thing that I want to say about Hanukkah, I want to talk about the lighting of the menorah. So let me grab this menorah here. So, and it's stuck to the aluminum foil, which is awesome. So here's the little menorah here.
I'm also not sure we have any more matches.
Oh, that could be interesting.
We might have to go electric.
We might have to go electric on this one?
Yeah.
Okay, we might have to. All right. See, this is why you should always have one person whose job it is to smoke. Because then you always know there's going to be a lighter or there's going to be matches.
It's true.
So anyway, the last thing I want to say about Hanukkah, we have the Hanukkah, and there was a debate in the old days. Hold on a sec, we have an immersion blender operating. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
It's me.
I'll talk loudly. So,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. So we have this Hanukkah, and back in the old days, there was a debate between two great rabbinical schools. And these weren't schools like we think of schools. These were philosophies of thought. One was Hillel, and the other was Shammai. These were two rabbis, and they were sort of rivals, I guess. And so the question was, what is the correct way to light the menorah? And so here's your menorah. Technically, a menorah that is used for Hanukkah that has the 8 here and then the shamash at the top is actually not called a menorah. It's called a Hanukkah. So that's your piece of Torah, exciting Torah knowledge for the evening. This is not a menorah. This is actually a Hanukkah. So what ended up happening was a debate over how you're supposed to light the candles. Do you light all your candles on the first night and then decrease light, or do you increase? You know, what is the right thing to do? So ultimately, as with a lot of issues, everyone sided with Hillel. Hillel is kind of like the rabbinic rock star. Yeah, and so Diane, yes, a menorah traditionally is 3 and 3, right, like that, and then the shamash at the top. This has more, so that's why this is a Hanukkah as opposed to a menorah. So in any case, so Hillel basically won, as he wins in almost everything, that we want to increase lights. We add more and more candles or more oil each night. I like this idea, but then something kind of sad happens when we think about the idea of lighting more and more and more light. Because eventually, what's going to happen to this Hanukkah? We're going to stop using it. We're going to get to the last night, and then that next night, because Jewish holidays start in the evening, which works great if you're a night owl, that next night, Hanukkah's over with. And this menorah gets packed up. And then our next exciting holiday is Tu B'Shvat. You know, it's the holiday of the trees. So it's this idea of we're adding more and more light, but then all of a sudden the menorah or the Hanukkah just goes away. It kind of goes against the idea of adding more and more light, because once we're at like the most epic point of having the most light, then it's just gone. And it's kind of like a sad thing, because it's still dark outside. It's still wintertime. We add light, and we have Hanukkah during the winter because it's dark outside. It's our way of, as human beings, of creating light in a dark world. Because so much of Judaism is connected to the earth and the land and agriculture and things of that nature. So we have this moment where all of a sudden the light stops. So how do we reconcile with that? So what I would say is this is where we go from ritual action to human action. So we light this Hanukkah. We spend all of this time, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And then we're left having to figure out what to do next. And I think this is where we take that light metaphor and we move it into the next practice of bringing light, as Jenny just said, into the world. And Jonesy says we always have Shabbat candles. Great. So you're now doing exactly what the end of Hanukkah should be about. It's about that next step. What's that next step going to be? And I think that's what Judaism is all about. It's not about being the perfect Jew. It's about adding more and more all the time. Why do we lay tefillin? Why do we take this stupid leather box thing and put one here and do this thing, and then we got to wrap it all up in here, and your hands are all kind of screwed up and you don't know what to do and it's falling down? It's because there are those days where we can't connect Torah. There's those days when, and I have this happen to me all the time, I am doing Jewish stuff 10 hours a day on top of what it means to be Jewish as a person. So sometimes I look at that Torah and I'm like, forget this. I can't do it. I have that mental block today. I just can't bring myself to it. So you light tefillin, or you light candles, or you do whatever, you daven. You touch a mezuzah on your way out the door or the way in the door. And these are these physical reminders of, look, today might not be the day for reading the week's Torah portion. This might not be the day for davening. So you always have something else. There's always some other thing you need to do. There's always a charity box to put $1 in. There's always a person having a bad day whose day you can make better. The idea of, loving kindness, of chesed, global chesed, all of us being good to one another regardless of what kind of person we are. So there's all of these different activities. So I would say that when this is over with, you add a 9th candle, which is you. That light right over here that goes out everywhere, that's not bound by the halacha of a holiday. It's a light that's bound just to you that you can share with anyone. So, all right, so we've got a few minutes. I actually need to plug in my computer because I'm starting to run out of battery power. So, I know we've got a lot of people in here who maybe want to ask questions. You don't have to talk about the class or whatever. If you have other Jewish questions you want to ask, if you want to talk about one shul, whatever the case may be, I'd be happy to answer questions about that. While you are typing some of those answers, I want to encourage you to do a few things. First, every single person that is here, Diane, Jenny, Jonesy, Jason, I want all of you to email me tonight, patrick@punktorah.org. Again, that's Patrick, Patrick, at punk, Punktorah, Torah.org. Email me tonight. I want to get to know you. If you live in the Southeast, I want to hang out with you. If you don't live in the Southeast, I want to hang out with you. I want to get to know you. The reason why I want to get to know you is you are a member of one shul. You deserve to be heard. You matter. I want to know what kinds of classes you're interested in. I want to know what kinds of prayer services you're interested in. And I want to know what kinds of things you would like to teach or lead, because you can be just as much a teacher or a leader. In the process of my conversion, before I formally converted, I was leading in the Jewish community. If I can do it, Anyone can. So I would really encourage you to step up and to take that opportunity. Another thing I'd like to tell you about is donation. And again, I know that's not something people like to talk about, but it's very important. I want you to consider. There's a community not too far from where I am right now, and to be a member, just a member, they charge $600. That's just to come to Shabbat services and to come to high holidays. How much does one shul charge? Nothing. And we never will. Never. There should never be a financial barrier to being Jewish. That is the worst thing in the world. Now, what does that mean, though? That means that I have to ask you to give a donation. So you can donate at the top of the website. You click on the little button there. I've added a link in the website in the chat room as well. You can email me, again, patrick@punktorah.org, to set something else. And Jonesy says, just 600? Yes. Yep, believe it or not. And yes, most that you checked were around 1,500. Yes, this is an independent community, the one that I'm talking about that we're close to, and that's inexpensive. And that's for one single person. Now, that means a person who is unmarried and doesn't have children and is over 30. So that's why it's $600. A family, a married couple, or an unmarried cohabitating couple, $1,000 easy. Like I said, what does it cost one shul to operate a month? $100. We have 1,000 people a month who go on this website. So, something to think about there. So, again, if you need to set up an alternate form of payment, if you want to do like a monthly payment thing, you can do that. You can go on PunkTorah.org and donate directly through PunkTorah. You can email me and we can set something up. And of course, all of you are going to be emailing me tonight, so we'll get to talk more about volunteering. Volunteering is just as important as donating. In fact, sometimes it's better. If there are things with the websites, with writing, with content, whatever the case is, and we would have to pay someone to do that by volunteering, you are saving PunkTorah money. So that's the importance of volunteering. It means a lot. So again, patrick@punktorah.org, or if you look at the top of one shul, there's a button that says volunteer. So you can click on that and sign up to volunteer. So any last questions? Anything anyone want to talk about? We've got a few more minutes here, and I'm going to go on ahead and get, I think we'll have to do electric menorah because we can't find any matches. Okay. And I don't think I brought any matches with me, so we'll have to figure this out.
You're going to have to start smoking again.
I'm going to have to start smoking again, yeah. All right. So I will go on ahead and bring us over to the electric menorah. We'll do it that way. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to type them in the meantime. How do we turn on some light here?
You okay?
Yeah. All right. There we go. All right. Now, since we're not lighting the physical candles, and you know what? I think there's a way that we can do it, you and I just realized, the heating element in the stove. That's what we'll have to do. But we'll do it this way for one shul because we're an electric-based community, so we'll use an electric method. Let's see. There we go. So, I'm going to do the last one here. Since we're not fulfilling the complete mitzvah, I'm going to say an alternate sort of thing, which is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Ta-da! So, we have our glowing electric menorah, which I have a whole story about that. I'll share some other time. Any other questions, any comments? Otherwise, we're going to go on ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for participating here at One Shul. Our schedule is a little bit funky because of the holidays, but we're going to be returning with more classes and things like that very soon. I would encourage you, there is an email list. If you get signed up for the email list, please, please, please do that. All you have to do is click the little email button that's at the top. It says follow us on email, and you'll be able to sign up for the email list that way. And thank you again so much for being here at One Shul. It's just so great to be with you and to be a community. Yes, Katsira is doing Rosh Chodesh. That is tomorrow. There will be a bulletin that will go out. Again, sign up for the email list. You'll know all about it. Yeah. And Diane asks, is it scheduled for tomorrow? Yes, it is scheduled for tomorrow, Tuesday. All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. Again, if you have any sort of after-class questions, feel free to email me, patrick@punktorah.org. And it was wonderful to be here with you. Hag Sameach. We still have Hanukkah going on. Let's celebrate it together. The best way to celebrate Hanukkah is with those that you love. And I love being with you. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. So anyway, Hag Sameach.